What if every decision you've ever made, every choice you were absolutely certain about, every judgment you trusted completely, was built on a foundation of systematic invisible error? Not occasionally, not when you're tired or stressed or distracted. Every single day, in ways your brain is specifically designed to hide from you. That's not a metaphor, that's not philosophy, that's neuroscience. And by the time this video is over, you will never trust your own certainty the same way again. Today we're going deep into one of the most important books ever written about the human mind, Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. A Nobel Prize-winning psychologist who spent 50 years studying the exact mechanisms your brain uses to deceive you, not out of malice, out of efficiency. And the difference between those two things is what makes this so terrifying and so fascinating. Let's begin. Your brain has a problem, and the problem is that it's extraordinarily good at its job. It processes roughly 11 million bits of information per second. It navigates complex social environments, manages your body's systems, interprets language, reads emotion, predicts outcomes. All simultaneously, all without your conscious awareness. It is, by almost any measure, the most sophisticated information processing system ever observed in the known universe. And it cuts corners everywhere. Because processing 11 million bits of information consciously would be impossible, so your brain developed a workaround. Actually, two systems working in parallel, and the tension between them is at the heart of everything Kahneman spent his career trying to understand. He calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional. It operates below the surface of conscious thought, firing instantaneous responses based on pattern recognition, association, and past experience. It's the system that reads the word banana before you've consciously decided to read it. It's the system that tenses your body when you hear a loud noise before your mind has identified what the sound is. It's the system that forms a first impression of a stranger in under 200 milliseconds. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical. It's the part of you that does long division, reads a contract carefully, or weighs the pros and cons of a major life decision. It requires effort, real, metabolic, exhausting effort, and because of that, because thinking carefully is literally expensive for your brain, System 2 is lazy. Profoundly, dangerously lazy. Here's the brutal truth Kahneman spent decades documenting. System 1 runs your life far more than you realize, and System 2, rather than checking System 1's work, mostly just narrates it, constructing rational-sounding explanations for decisions that were already made instinctively, emotionally, automatically. You think you're reasoning. Mostly you're rationalizing. If that idea is already making you question yourself, good. Hit that subscribe button right now because what we're about to get into goes much deeper. This channel exists for people who aren't afraid to have their assumptions shattered. Let's talk about one of the most unsettling concepts in the entire book, cognitive ease. Your brain, at any given moment, is running a background assessment, not of external threats, of mental effort. It is constantly evaluating how hard it's working, and when things feel easy, when information flows smoothly, when a face looks familiar, when a sentence is simple to read, your brain sends a signal that psychologists associate with something remarkable. Truth. Not actual truth, felt truth. The subjective sensation of something being correct. Kahneman's research shows that when information is presented in a way that's easy to process, in a clear font with rhyming language repeated multiple times, people rate it as more credible, more intelligent, and more likely to be accurate. Not because the content changed, because the experience of receiving it changed. This is why propaganda works. This is why advertising works. This is why a confident, fluent speaker is perceived as more competent than a hesitant, careful one, even when the careful one is actually right. Your brain isn't evaluating the argument. It's evaluating how smoothly the argument arrived, and it's calling that evaluation judgment. But cognitive ease is just the beginning, because Kahneman's research goes on to document a catalogue of cognitive biases so extensive, so pervasive, and so deeply embedded in normal human functioning that reading through them feels less like learning, and more like a slow, slightly nauseating reckoning with your own fallibility. Let's take the anchoring effect. In one of the most famous experiments in behavioral psychology, Kahneman and his longtime collaborator Amos Tversky asked participants to spin a wheel, rigged to stop at either 10 or 65, and then estimate the percentage of African countries in the United Nations, completely unrelated pieces of information. The result was staggering. People who spun 65 gave estimates averaging around 45%. People who spun 10 averaged around 25%. A random number, a number they knew was random, had physically shifted their judgment on an entirely separate question. That's the anchor. An arbitrary piece of information that lodges itself in your processing and warps every estimate that follows. And it doesn't require deception. It doesn't require you to be uninformed or unintelligent. It happens to experts. It happens to judges. It happens to doctors estimating diagnoses and investors evaluating stock prices and hiring managers assessing salary expectations. The first number you hear becomes the gravitational center of every number you think after it. Now let's talk about something that Kahneman calls the availability heuristic. And this one has consequences that extend far beyond personal decision-making into the very fabric of how societies function. When your brain needs to assess the likelihood of something, how dangerous is flying? How common is violent crime? How probable is it that this business will succeed? It doesn't run a statistical analysis. It asks a different question entirely. How easily can I think of an example? If examples come to mind quickly and vividly, your brain concludes the thing is common, likely, real. If examples are hard to retrieve, it concludes the opposite. The problem is that ease of retrieval has almost nothing to do with actual frequency. It has everything to do with emotional intensity, recency, and media exposure. After a plane crash is covered extensively in the news, fear of flying spikes, despite the fact that the statistical risk of flying hasn't changed at all. People dramatically overestimate the probability of dying in a terrorist attack, and dramatically underestimate the probability of dying from heart disease, because one generates vivid, emotionally charged, endlessly repeated media coverage, and the other is quiet and statistical and familiar. Your brain isn't lying to you out of stupidity. It's lying to you out of a system that was designed for a world where the most memorable things were the most relevant things. For most of human evolutionary history, that was true. The tiger you saw last week was more relevant than mortality statistics, but you don't live in that world anymore, and your brain hasn't caught up. There's a concept Kahneman introduces called WYSIATI. What you see is all there is. And I want you to sit with this one for a moment, because it may be the most quietly devastating idea in the entire book. System 1 doesn't know what it doesn't know. It builds the most coherent story possible from the information currently available, and then it acts on that story as if it's complete. It doesn't flag gaps. It doesn't issue uncertainty warnings. It doesn't say, there may be information I'm missing that would change this conclusion. It just concludes, confidently, immediately. This is why first impressions are so sticky. Your brain built a complete narrative from incomplete data and committed to it before you had a chance to intervene. This is why snap political judgments are so resistant to evidence. The story was already finished before the evidence arrived. This is why overconfidence is one of the most consistent and most costly biases documented in human psychology. Because the less information system one has, paradoxically, the more confident the story it constructs tends to feel. A mind with partial information doesn't experience itself as partial. It experiences itself as sufficient. And in that gap, between what we know and what we think we know, lives an enormous amount of human suffering, human error, and human tragedy. There's an experiment Kahneman describes that I want you to imagine yourself inside of. You're given a choice between two options. Option A, you receive a guaranteed $1,000 right now. Option B, you flip a coin. Heads, you receive $2,500. Tails, you receive nothing. Mathematically, option B is the superior choice. The expected value is higher. Any economist operating under classical rational agent theory would tell you to flip the coin without hesitation. But the overwhelming majority of people choose option A every time, across cultures, across income levels, across education backgrounds. And when Kahneman flips the scenario, when instead of choosing between gains, you're choosing between losses, something even more dramatic happens. Suddenly people who are perfectly happy to avoid risk become willing to gamble everything just to avoid the certainty of losing. This asymmetry is one of the most important discoveries in the history of behavioral economics. Kahneman calls it loss aversion, and its implications reach so far into human behavior that once you see it, you cannot unsee it anywhere. The core finding is deceptively simple. Losses hurt approximately twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. Losing $100 produces roughly twice the psychological impact of gaining $100 produces pleasure. The pain of loss is not just uncomfortable, it is neurologically disproportionate. Your brain treats loss as a threat to survival, in a way it simply does not treat equivalent gain as an opportunity. Think about what this means in practice. It means investors hold on to failing stocks far longer than rational analysis would justify, because selling crystallizes the loss, and the brain will do almost anything to avoid that finality. It means people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that have expired, cities that no longer fit them, because the known pain of the current situation is psychologically easier to bear than the uncertain but vivid terror of losing what they already have. It means that the person trying to sell you something is far more persuasive when they frame their offer as something you'll lose if you don't act, rather than something you'll gain if you do. Don't miss out is neurologically more powerful than here's what you get. Every marketer who has ever lived has understood this intuitively. Kahneman proved it scientifically. And here is the part that should genuinely disturb you. Knowing about loss aversion does not make you immune to it. That's what makes Kahneman's work so different from ordinary self-help. He's not telling you that awareness creates immunity. He's telling you something harder and more honest. That these biases are features of human cognition, not bugs that education can patch. You can learn to design systems and environments that reduce their impact. But you cannot think your way out of your own nervous system. If this video is reshaping how you see your own mind, share it with someone who needs to hear this. And if you haven't already, like this video, it's a small thing for you, but it genuinely determines whether this kind of content reaches the people who are quietly searching for exactly this. Now let's talk about one of the most philosophically rich and personally confronting ideas in the entire book. Kahneman draws a distinction between two versions of you that exist simultaneously and almost never agree with each other. He calls them the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self is who you are in this moment. It lives in the present, second by second, sensation by sensation. It feels the actual texture of your life as it's happening. The discomfort, the joy, the boredom, the connection, the pain. The remembering self is who you are in retrospect. It constructs the story of your life. It decides what experiences meant. It determines what you'll choose to do again and what you'll avoid. It is the self that answers when someone asks, "How was your vacation?" or "Are you happy with your career?" Here is the critical problem. These two selves use completely different accounting systems, and the remembering self wins almost every time. Kahneman's research reveals something he calls the peak end rule. When your remembering self evaluates an experience, it doesn't average across the entire duration. It samples two moments: the emotional peak, the most intense point, positive or negative, and the ending. Everything in between is largely ignored. Duration barely registers. He demonstrated this with a study involving patients undergoing a genuinely painful medical procedure. One group experienced the standard procedure. A second group experienced the same procedure, but then had a final few minutes of reduced, milder discomfort added at the end before it concluded. The second group's procedure was objectively longer and contained all the same pain as the first, plus additional pain. But when asked to evaluate their experience afterward, the second group rated it as significantly less unpleasant, because it ended more gently, because the last note of the experience was softer. The remembering self heard the final chord and rewrote the entire symphony. Think about the implications of this for your own life. Think about the relationships you remember as failures because of how they ended, despite years of genuine meaning. Think about the vacations you remember as wonderful because the last day was perfect, despite multiple difficult moments throughout. Think about the careers, the projects, the friendships whose value in your memory bears almost no relationship to the actual texture of living them day by day. Your remembering self is not keeping accurate records. It is constructing a narrative, and it is using that narrative to make every significant decision about your future. Kahneman introduces another concept that cuts right to the heart of human ambition and failure: the planning fallacy. We are, as a species, almost pathologically optimistic about our own future projects. When people estimate how long a task will take, how much a project will cost, how likely their business is to succeed, they systematically and dramatically underestimate obstacles and overestimate their own capabilities and advantages. This isn't limited to naive or inexperienced people. It happens to architects, engineers, government planners, surgeons, entrepreneurs, professionals with decades of domain expertise who have personally witnessed project after project run over time and over budget. They still underestimate the next one. Kahneman explains this through what he calls the inside view versus the outside view. When we plan our own projects, we focus on the specific details of our specific situation, our particular idea, our particular team, our particular vision. We build our estimates from the inside, and from the inside our plan always looks more viable than the base rate of similar plans would suggest. The outside view asks a different question entirely. What actually happened to other people who attempted something like this? What is the statistical track record of projects with this profile, in this industry, at this scale? When the outside view is applied, the optimism almost always deflates significantly. But System 1 doesn't naturally reach for the outside view. It reaches for the vivid, emotionally compelling inside story. Your story, your vision, your exceptional circumstances. And System 2, remember, is lazy. It often doesn't bother to correct the optimism because correcting it requires effort, and the optimistic story feels so much better. This is why most businesses fail, why most construction projects finish late, why most diets are abandoned, why most New Year's resolutions evaporate before February, not because people are weak, because they are human, because they are running cognitive hardware that was never designed for the complexity of modern planning. So where does this leave us? If our brains are this systematically compromised, if System 1 is this dominant, this confident and this wrong, what are we supposed to do with that? Kahneman is not a nihilist. He doesn't conclude that because perfect rationality is impossible, we should stop trying to think carefully. What he offers instead is something more honest and more useful, a framework for knowing when your intuition is likely trustworthy and when it is most likely to betray you. Intuition, he argues, can be genuinely reliable, but only under specific conditions. When you have operated in a domain long enough to accumulate real pattern recognition, when the environment you're operating in provides clear, consistent, rapid feedback that allows your System 1 to actually learn. An experienced firefighter's gut feeling about a building's structural stability is not the same kind of intuition as a first-time investor's gut feeling about a stock. One is pattern recognition, built from thousands of hours of feedback-rich experience. The other is System 1 constructing a confident story from cognitive ease, recent media exposure, and the anchoring effect. Both feel identical from the inside. That's the trap. And the only way out of it is not to trust the feeling of certainty, but to learn to ask every single time. What kind of intuition is this? Has this domain earned my trust in my gut? Or is my gut just performing confidence? The final idea I want to leave you with is the one that I believe ties everything together, and it comes from the very last sections of Kahneman's work. He talks about what it would actually mean to live well, given everything we now know about how the mind operates. The experiencing self wants presence, pleasure in the moment, flow, connection, the texture of a life actually felt rather than merely planned and remembered. The remembering self wants narrative, meaning, a story that holds together, milestones that can be pointed to, an answer to the question, was it worth it? Most of us, most of the time, sacrifice the experiencing self on the altar of the remembering self. We endure joyless years building toward a future moment that the remembering self can be proud of. We optimize for the highlight reel rather than the daily reality. We make choices designed to look good in retrospect rather than feel good in progress. Kahneman doesn't tell you which self to prioritize. That's not his place, and he knows it. But he asks you to at least make the choice consciously, to understand that these two selves exist, that they want different things, and that every major decision you make is implicitly a vote for one over the other. Because the most dangerous thing, the thing that Kahneman's entire life's work is a quiet argument against, is making that choice unconsciously. letting System 1 decide what your life means, what your experiences were worth, and what you should reach for next, without ever submitting any of it to the slow, effortful, uncomfortable scrutiny of genuine thought. Your brain is lying to you. Not always, not maliciously, but consistently, structurally, and in ways that have real consequences for every dimension of your life. The question Kahneman leaves you with, the one I think deserves to live rent-free in your mind from this moment forward, is devastatingly simple. Who is actually making your decisions? If this video changed something in how you see your own thinking, drop a comment below and tell me the single idea that hit you hardest. Was it loss aversion? The remembering self? The planning fallacy? This community is one of the most thoughtful spaces on this platform, and I genuinely want to know what landed for you. Thinking, Fast and Slow is not a comfortable book. It doesn't flatter you. It doesn't tell you that you're smarter than you think, or that your instincts are secretly genius. It does something far more valuable. It tells you the truth about the mind you're actually working with, and gives you just enough understanding to begin, slowly, carefully, working with it more wisely. And in a world where almost everything is designed to exploit your cognitive shortcuts, that kind of clarity isn't just intellectually interesting. It might be the most important advantage you ever develop.